Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Today we're continuing on with Horror Anthropology. We are on to Central Europe. Approximately this area here. And this area here actually made me realize some things. Before, I had Horror Anthropology basically broken up by horrors affected by the dominant religion of the area, of the region, and horror differences affected through differences of cultures' histories. But one thing I forgot in this, that I realized during this section, is language. There's a lot more similarities in the languages in these countries in Central Europe than necessarily in the geological or geographical areas, or in the historical regions. I mean, history is going to play a part, obviously, but I think language is actually going to play a big part as well. For instance, a lot of Austria stuff just gets shifted right into Germany. Switzerland as well. Switzerland gets split between France and Germany. There's and Switzerland gets a little bit of Italian stuff as well, being it's one of those countries that has like 6 official languages or more. I don't remember. But yeah, that's so I think differences in horror affected through differences in countries' languages, or dominant language of the region. Horror is affected by the dominant language of the region is also something to take into account. Because, another reason, in this section I have a list of the countries I want to go over in this area. France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Ireland, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Lichtenstein, which are on here, except for Ireland, which is over here. And then there's United Kingdom that I'm ignoring because I sort of go over that when I go over American stuff, because it's English, it's the language we speak. And of course Ireland is also, with the exception of the Irish language things, it's one of the official languages of Ireland. Yeah, English has to be an official, maybe not an official language, but an accepted language. Maybe that's the word. Oops. I have my tea. It's getting cold enough for tea again. So I think, yeah, Irish being for the most part English speaking is more lumped in with America and Canada and Australia and UK in terms of its influence. New Zealand, etc., other English speaking countries. Not to say that they're not gaining their own flavor, which is basically what I'm shooting for here, each flavor of these different horrors of these different areas. It's starting to, especially nowadays, the 2000 pluses, the movies from Ireland are getting their own Irish flavor. I don't go over that as well. France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Ireland, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Let me just get Liechtenstein out of the way. If you see Liechtenstein on here, you must have very good eyes. It's a little dot in between Switzerland and Austria. And there's no horror from there. So we can get that one out of the way already. Switzerland and Luxembourg, I only saw stuff that was filmed there, not anything really from there. Not anything independently from there. Luxembourg, of course, is the little purple in between France, Belgium, and Germany. Switzerland above Italy there, next to France. So now we're down to 6, and then there were 6. But these 6 are pretty big. Where should I start? I'm going to start with France, because that's where I was planning on starting to begin with. France is huge. Not just geographically, but historically in horror. What do I have here? New French Extremity is a brand of French horror film being made nowadays, 21st century. The 80s and 90s is more of a transition stage between older and newer. I'll go over that too. 60s and 70s, we have Jean Rollin. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. The Grand Guignol, Guignol, I believe is how it's pronounced. Georges Méliès, I've talked about before. Guy de Maupassant, I've talked about before. Marquis de Sade, I haven't, but most people know who the Marquis de Sade is. We'll start at the present and work our way back, because that's how I like to do history. New French Extremity. I like New French Extremity. It's described, Wikipedia actually has it, it's described as a crossover between sexual decadence, bestial violence, and troubling psychosis. A lot of art horror and body horror in this section. This is what I got from this section. This is sadistic in the very French meaning of the word, getting off on violence and what the baddies do. Frontiers. Oh, did I have a video? Not a video, but a picture from Frontiers. It was such a creepy looking thing. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, here we go. Save picture as. Maybe I can put it up now. Yeah. It was essentially, this was from, what year was this? 2007? It seems to be the cross between The Hills Have Eyes and Hostel. Creepy stuff, definitely modernistic. There's another one called Inside. A sadistic woman attacks a pregnant woman, and there's a showdown between them in an apartment house thing. Martyrs. Torture psychosis with some supernatural bits. people, essentially a underground group is torturing people to find out about this afterlife. So torturing them till death, but keeping them on the brink of death. Fun stuff. Oh. I'm gonna pronounce this wrong. One of my favorite French actresses of the alternative cinema, Karen Lancôme, who committed suicide in 2006, was in one of these type things called Base-moi, a thriller, which is more of a thriller side of things, with a lot of sex. Karen Lancôme was a porn actress. So yeah, but she still was in one of these classic New French Extremity movies. Oh, there's so much in France. Eden Log? Is that what? Am I even pronouncing these things right at this point? My handwriting's really bad, people, so I can't even read my own handwriting sometimes. I think it's Eden Log, which was a supernatural Saw, or Saw meets Alien. I think it's Eden Log. Yeah, Eden Log. That's 2007 as well. I'm putting it in terms of American movies or American influence, because of course these days the world's getting smaller. Different cultures are interacting with different cultures easier, etc., etc. So there's a lot more influence from different outside things that wouldn't have otherwise. 80s, 90s. Okay, let's talk about the 80s and 90s. Oh yeah, I can't forget that. Which I said was a transition place, which it is. 80s and 90s is transition. From the older style, which we'll get into, which is essentially the 60s and 70s. Jean Rollin is very much like Hammer style. If I'm not saying they're Hammer ripoffs or anything, but Hammer started. I can't even tell which one started first. Hammer started, and then there's the Italians and Germans and French all started at the same time doing Hammer type films. So the Hammer type films of the 60s and 70s were picked up by, every country in Europe was essentially doing the same thing at the same time. I'm not sure who actually wins for getting the first, and I'm not going to even attempt to say that one country is ripping off the other countries. There is a lot of just everything happened at once sort of thing. So the 60s and 70s, the Jean Rollin era, was the Hammer style, and then of course the 21st century was this new French extremity. The 80s and 90s were the transition between the two. There was some thrillers in the 80s. Where am I at? French. There was an Baxter in 89, where a murderous dog narrates its evil life. Finds like a neo-Nazi owner, and the neo-Nazi kid kills the dog at the end. I don't know. It's weird. Baby blood, parasites in the womb of a woman demanding blood. 1990. So that sort of transition between the two. Then, of course, you're going back to the 60s. We have Carmilla adaptations from La Fanu. Oh, what do I have for Jean Rollin? Jean Rollin. Le Voile de Vampire. Le Raisins de l'Amour. He was the first French gore film, Les Raisins de l'Amour, The Grapes of Death. Le Viol du Vampire, 1968. Queen of the Vampires. Rape of the Vampire, I'm not sure which one it translates to. Yeah, did a lot of vampire movies in the 60s and 70s. The Nude Vampire, Thrill of the Vampires, Requiem of the Vampire, etc. Demoniacs. Was also an actor in a lot of these movies as well. I was going to say this. This section, I was really hoping to recommend Horror Europa by Mark Gatiss, the documentary Mark Gatiss did on European horror, because it really helps, but it's now down. BBC took it off of, I think asked for it to be called off of YouTube, and they don't have it up on their site anymore. BBC 4. I don't even think you can, I don't think you can order it either, because I was trying to see if I could get a hard copy, a DVD, and I don't think I was able to find that either. Horror Europa, but if you see Horror Europa anywhere and you want information on this by Mark Gatiss, who's a BBC guy from Sherlock, if you know this BBC show Sherlock. He also did a history of horror, which was really good for American and British horror films. But Horror Europa, I'm trying to remember some of the stuff that he talked about in Horror Europa, because he did a lot more research than I was able to do. And he was able to get a good flavor of each of these countries. One of the ones he did talk about, pre Jean Rollin, was Les Diaboliques. There was another one too, and there was Eyes Without a Face as well. I think both French. Les Diaboliques was the bathtub corpse. If anybody's seen or read, seen The Shining, there is the bathtub corpse. Again, I have to look over my shoulder whenever I'm talking about ghosts because it freaks me out. Yeah. So the first bathtub corpse was Les Diaboliques, 1955. So super early. It was actually a predecessor to Psycho and influential on Psycho. The guy who directed it beat Hitchcock to the screenplay of it. So it was very influential on Psycho. What was that? So So that's 1955. We're still going back in time, aren't we? Wrong button. That's what I was after. Prior to Jean Rollin, you have the Théâtre de Grand Guignol, which is a theater in Paris where violent stuff was produced. Naturalistic horror, I think, is what they called it. Naturalistic horror. Sometimes it would be really violent plays like Titus Andronicus by Shakespeare, which, if you've seen the movie with Anthony Hopkins, it's really creepy and really violent. And as well as more violent, just other violent plays and, you know, things along those lines, pushing the envelope as much as possible. Grand Guignol nowadays is sort of used as an insult to say violent for the sake of being violent or gruesome for the sake of being gruesome. The tradition of Grand Guignol is not exactly a positive thing to say to some about someone's work, but for horror, you know, it fits a lot of times. Let's see what else we have. We have Georges Méliès, of course. We talked about him. The first horror movies, The Haunted Mansion, Haunted Castle. He was the ex-magician who became a director in the 1890s, 1910s, and made these horror movies, basically doing massive film cuts, where you cut the film and then there's a guy in a sheet. It's like, oh, it's a ghost, and then you cut the film, the guy in the sheet's gone. Oh, he disappeared. Right. And then there's a devil popping up from a puff of smoke. Georges Méliès. You can find most of those films on YouTube very easily. I'm also skipping Phantom of the Opera, which was 1910. Sort of that, Grand Guignol style. It's naturalistic. It's the fantastic in the sense of the word, the literary sense of the word that we were talking about very much earlier when we were talking about horror plots. Yeah, so that's 1910. Diabolique. What else do we have? Guy de Maupassant. Post-Poe is really where he falls in, but of course he's he's his own writer, and very good writer. I'm actually a big fan of de Maupassant, especially his horror stuff, the Horla. There's a couple. I can't remember them now. Oh, here's a couple more. I found another. My pages of French notes are all over the place. 1928, Fall of the House of Usher, obviously a Poe adaptation. Silent movie. 2007 had Hell Phone, a demonic cell phone horror comedy. 2009 had La Horde, which was essentially Left 4 Dead, the video game in movie form. Zombie horde, and a couple of people trying to survive it. by sticking together. There's a lot. French has a big tradition. And of course, you go back to Marquis de Sade, who wrote in the 1790s. Where we get the word sadistic from. He got his jollies from violence. Well, he wrote about getting his jollies from violence, and from all accounts, he basically practiced what he wrote. Okay, so, Jesus, that was all of France. Okay, so, nope, that's France. Germany is pretty big as well, so let's go to Germany. I'm not forgetting anything. Nope. Okay. Germany, 80s onward is a little bit different. I might start from the back and might start from the past and go forward on this one, just to be a little, makes a little more sense that way. So let's start with the fantasists from the 19th century. This I'm talking about of course, Grimm brothers and Hoffman, E.T.A. Hoffman, who did a few things, and most famous for the Nutcracker book that was turned into the ballet, and did other fantasies type stuff. So the fantasists, making fantasies, fairy tales and fantasies. You guys know what fantasies are. I'm going to say fantasies over and over again until it makes sense. They wrote fantasies. I'm not going to say it again. German Expressionists. This is the group from pre-World War II. Nosferatu movie. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Madness, Black Spider, Fear, Figures of the Night. Silent movies, very artistic. Expressionists. They were atmospheric and dreamy. Dreamy is probably a very good thing for Caligari especially, but Nosferatu also had it. Werner Herzog, actually going back to Nosferatu, we have Nosferatu the Vampire by Herzog. He's a director from when? When would Nosferatu? Nosferatu the Vampire was 1979. His other one that fits on it is 1970. Evendorf Started Small. What should we say about Herzog? Herzog is well, okay. According to Wikipedia, here we go. He's one of the greatest figures in New German cinema, along with Fassbinder, Trotta, etc., etc. Is he dead? No, he's still alive. Okay, cool. I'm glad to hear that. One of these big-time directors of the people who make great movies. He's definitely one of the great living ones. Nosferatu the Vampire was essentially his homage to Nosferatu the 1922 black and white silent movie, the Max Schreck and F.W. Murnau. And then we get into the weird German stuff. We get into a lot, and weird German stuff it is. Necromantic 1 and 2 was necrophiliac movies, violent shit, slasher zombies, pornographic horror, like Maniac and Mercilessly Betrayed. As extreme as you can go. Violent shit is actually... Violent Shit is the title of one of these movies. It was essentially... After World War II, Germans' movies became censored quite heavily because Germans didn't want to be seen as violent anymore, considering that they were considering their role in World War II, that sort of makes sense. So they said, all right, we're not going to be violent anymore. We're going to try to calm these things down. So they did for their theatrical releases. They didn't edit or didn't censor their VHS direct releases. So some of these, the backlash of the censorship was these direct-to-video releases of really, really violent stuff, like Violent Shit. And of course, there's pornographic horror, which is pornography and horror mixed together. Necromantic is necrophiliac stuff. Die Blutgrafin, Tilda Swinton was Elizabeth Bathory. Fleisch is an organ trade slasher. Vampire Happening, based on a horror comedy based on L'amour amoureuse. Oh, Night of the Living Dorks, which is actually a really great movie. Night of the Living Dorks is a horror comedy based on Night of the Living Dead, but featuring 3, dorks who get turned into zombies. There's this odd thriller called Darred Divorce. And then the rest of 80s and today, 80s onward, most of it is following the U.S.'s lead, following Hollywood's lead. Anatomy is a med student slasher movie. Durbinen is Monster Bees, We Are the Night, all-women vampire coven. Jonathan is I Am Legend, based in the 18th century. And then there's a lot of films filmed in Germany, like in Switzerland and Austria and Luxembourg, and stuff like that, that are for different companies based in Italy or Spain or America. Cursed with Christina Ricci, the werewolf movie, was apparently filmed a lot in Germany. So was Sleepy Hollow with Christina Ricci again and Johnny Depp. Cemetery Man, which was what's his name? I can't remember. Jesus Franco filmed a lot of his Spanish horrors there, etc. So, okay, Germany. I'm going to skip Belgium and Austria. How am I doing here? 35 minutes. Alright. Belgium and Austria. Let me go to Belgium and Netherlands. I'm going to go to Austria from Belgium, skipping Belgium and Netherlands real quick. In the old days, there was like the German Expressionists, the Austrian version of German Expressionism was also there. There's a lot of crossover between German and Austria, just because they share a common language. So there's the Hands of Orlok, which we talked about before. Yeah, we talked about before, way back, where the guy's hands... The guy gets murderer's hands, the piano player gets murderer's hands, so he wants to strangle people. And then there's the Count of Cagliostro. Also silent horror from 1920. Nowadays, there's actually Toi, or To, T-O-T. I don't know how it's pronounced in Austrian and German. Maybe it's French. No, that's not how you spell. That's not 3 in French either. Dead in 3 Days is the co-title. Basically a chain text message that you get as a chain saying, you're going to die in 3 days. And then you do. And then people are trying to fight it. And then there's a lot of directors, modern directors from Austria, which are worth mentioning. Ludwig Wust, Coma, which was odd, which was odd looking from what I read about it. A guy's having problems with his marriage, and something happens that makes him reconnect with a hooker that he used to beat up. And so he goes and finds the hooker that he used to beat up, and she's in a coma. So he takes her and brings her into his other house when he leaves his wife and whatever, and sort of continues the relationship. There's a lot of psychological tweaking in German, and a lot of these German things, like, oh, okay, that guy's completely twisted around the bend. Let's watch. Well, Horror of Personality, I think, is what it was called. When we're talking about Benny's video, which is the next one by Michael Haneck. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. 92, he did Benny's video, which was a little kid, a teenager, something twisted in his brain, and he beats a woman, beats a co-student to death while filming it, and then sort of has his parents clean up after him. Haneck is most famous for Funny Games, which you guys should know. It was redone in 2007 in America. It was originally 1997 in Austria and Germany, which was, there's a guys at a vacation home, and they meet these fellows there, and they kill everybody in interesting ways, seeing how long it takes for them to kill people, torture them, and then set them up with other victims and continuing torturing them. One of those Again, something's twisted in this guy. Let's watch what happens. A theme that's going to run through a lot of modern German from the 80s onward. Probably earlier than that. Films. 71 fragments, something is a mass murder. But it's more of a dramatic term. Time of the Wolf is a post-apocalyptic drama. Seventh Continent is an odd suicide film. Some of these things just sounded really weird. Again, twist in the brain. Let's watch what happens. And of course, before this modern era, you go back 20 years and you get the German equivalents of Hammer films, or the Austrian equivalents of Hammer films, or the Italian equivalents of Hammer films. The Spanish and Italian equivalents filmed in Germany and Austria quite a bit. So that's what they would be going on in the 60s and 70s. Okay, now let's... I'll jump to Ireland real quick. Ireland, of course, we have the writers of Ireland. Le Fanu, Sheridan Le Fanu, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, we talked about quite a bit in the history of horror. Stoker, we talked about quite a bit. This is, of course, before Ireland became an independent country. So, and of course, picture Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde, before 1917 when Ireland became independent. Post-Ireland independence for writers, there's Darren Shawn, which is a writer, young adult writer. Did the Demonata, and there's a vampire, Cirque du Freak. I think that's Darren Shawn as well. And Caitlin Kiernan, who I've talked about before also, especially when I was talking about the Lovecraft documentary. She was in that. She's lives in America now, but is Irish-born. Irish films have really picked up and come into their own after 2000. Modern stuff. Grabbers. I really want to see Grabbers. I haven't seen it yet, but I really do want to see it. It's horror comedy. Sea monsters come up from the bottom of the ocean and take anyone but drunk people. So the people fighting the monsters have to stay as drunk as possible. Boy Eats Girl, zombie film. Dead Meat, Isolation, Stitches. Stitches is a British company. Yeah, British-Irish. There's a lot of course, British, Irish being filmed in Ireland, but British companies, etc. But they're starting to come into their own as their own entity. Okay. Oh yeah, so now I can go back to Belgium and Netherlands. I always got the Netherlands and Belgium mixed up. Belgian films and Dutch films. I didn't know which one. Well, I would get them confused. So Belgium, of course, is green on the map, and Netherlands is the red, or orangey red. Belgian film. Let's just go backwards. Calvaire, which was 2004. which is essentially Deliverance meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is the easiest way I can describe it from the synopsis I've read. Seems interesting. 1988, Rabid Grannies. It was a trauma movie. Great aunts turned into vampires. There's a lot of gore and gore violence directed at kids. Rabid Grannies, trauma movies. I'm assuming most of you know. Very Z-type movie studio, famous for Toxic Avenger and Tromeo and Juliet, other weird stuff. Malperdius, the Labyrinth, Minotaur type thing, starred Orson Welles, and that was 1971. The Dutch ones, Dood Eend, Dead End, 2006. I don't have information on these ones. Sorry. I might have to get it as I go along. Dutch. Dead End was... something happens when a couple of kids are on their own. They go find help. They can't find help. They get stalked by a killer. Stuff you've seen 1,000 times before, but it's good to know that these kind of things are happening in other movies. And these kind of movies are being made in other countries as well. Something happens when out in the woods and they're being stalked. The Johnsons. Oh, the Johnsons looked cool. Let me see if I can get this picture. This is actually a great movie poster, so I'm going to see if I can pull this up real quick. Yes, I can. See if it works. Yeah, that's not bad. A single mother with a teenage daughter. The teenage daughter came to life through test tube fertilization. This was filmed this was 1992. Under the assistance of Dr. Johnson, the doctor not only made Emily, the teenager, but in secret also used the eggs of Victoria to make 7 boys. Victoria is the mother. When Emily is 14 years old, the mother takes her on a camping trip, and she suffers from nightmares about 7 men that are identical to her. 7 creepy stuff. 7 brothers. Ooh. But that looks like it's fun, if nothing else. The little guy on it looks like it's should be quite entertaining. The Lift. D-Lift, which would be, of course, a killer elevator. Easy enough. Saint, an evil zombie Santa Claus. Dark comedy type thing. And worst case scenario, which is a zombie soccer movie, where during the World Cup, zombie outbreak happens and... So I think Belgian and Dutch probably have a lot of similarities between the two, but there's language differences there, so there's going to be differences as well. It there's a mixed bag in this Central Europe. Of course, there's a mixed bag of languages as well, which makes things a little bit more interesting. We will continue on, of course, next time. I'm going to take a look at Southern Europe, which would be Portugal, Spain, Italy, and what's that other one? San Marino? Corsica? No. What's the one under Corsica? Anyway, I don't think there's anything from that one anyway, so moot point. Right. Whew. This one was tough, and especially because I can't find Horror Europa with Mark Gaddis. If I note to self, when I'm putting up the notes on this, make a link to BBC on here. Maybe BBC will have re-released it, and you can go watch it there. It's great. I do recommend it. It does help with this sort of thing. So anyway, till next time, we'll continue with horror anthropology. Coming to the end of Europe. There we go. Coming to the end of Europe, and then we'll go on to South America and Central America and Mexico, and then we'll try to get the rest of the world. Thanks for watching Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Have a great night. Or in the historical regions, I mean, history is going to play a part, obviously, but I think language is actually going to play a big part as well. For instance, a lot of Austria stuff just gets shifted right into Germany. Switzerland as well. Switzerland gets split between France and Germany. There's and Switzerland gets a little bit of Italian stuff as well, being it's one of those countries that has like 6 official languages or more. I don't remember. But yeah, that's so I think differences in horror affected through differences in countries' languages, or dominant language of the region. Horror is affected by the dominant language of the region is also something to take into account. Because, another reason, in this section I have a list of the countries I want to go over in this area. France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Ireland, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Lichtenstein, which are on here, except for Ireland, which is over here. And then there's United Kingdom that I'm ignoring because I sort of go over that when I go over American stuff, because it's English, it's the language we speak. And of course Ireland is also, with the exception of the Irish language things, it's one of the official languages of Ireland. English has to be an official, maybe not an official language, but an accepted language. Maybe that's the word. Oops. I have my tea. It's getting cold enough for tea again. So I think, Irish being for the most part English speaking is more lumped in with America and Canada and Australia and ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Today we're continuing on with horror anthropology. We are on to Central Europe. I mean, approximately this area here. And this area here actually made me realize some things. Before, I had horror anthropology basically broken up by horrors affected by the dominant religion of the area, of the region, and horror differences affected through differences of cultures' histories. But one thing I forgot in this, that I realized during this section, is language. There's a lot more similarities in the languages in these countries in Central Europe than necessarily in the geological or geographical areas, UK, in terms of its influence. New Zealand, etc., other English-speaking countries. Not to say that they're not gaining their own flavor, which is basically what I'm shooting for here, each flavor of these different horrors of these different areas. It's starting to, especially nowadays, the 2000 pluses, the movies from Ireland are getting their own Irish flavor. And we'll go over that as well. France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Ireland, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Lichtenstein. Let me just get Lichtenstein out of the way. If you see Lichtenstein on here, you must have very good eyes. It's a little dot in between Switzerland and Austria. And there's no horror from there. So we can get that one out of the way already. Switzerland and Luxembourg, I only saw stuff that was filmed there, not anything really from there. Not anything independently from there. Luxembourg, of course, is the little purple in between France, Belgium, and Germany. Switzerland above Italy there, next to France. So now we're down to 6, and then there were 6. But these 6 are pretty big. Where should I start? I'm going to start with France, because that's where I was planning on starting to begin with. France is huge. Not just geographically, but historically in horror. What do I have here? New French Extremity is a brand of French horror film being made nowadays, 21st century. The 80s and 90s is more of a transition stage between older and newer. I'll go over that too. 60s and 70s, we have Jean Rollin. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. The Grand Guignol, Guignol, I believe is how it's pronounced. Georges Méliès, I've talked about before. Guy de Maupassant, I've talked about before. Marquis de Sade, I haven't, but most people know who the Marquis de Sade is.